A Burning in New Haven by Brandish Gilhelm. Chapter 3. At last, a bloody town. Two haggard figures trudged south on the Haven's Hill Road, just a bowshot from the outer wall of New Haven proper. Here a few farms dotted the roadside, egg and hay vendors talked and loitered about, and these two figures stood out, drawing gossip as they walked by. On the left, splashing carelessly in the muddy gutter, walked a man clad in mud-caked plate mail. But it was half-fitted, cobbled together, acid-scorched, blade-hewn. The armor was a disgrace. The frogs were all twisted and tied in knots rather than buckled, and no two pieces even matched. He wore a patch of green bloody lizard hide as his chain tasset, and one glove was red-scaled like a pine cone. His helmet, which was partially caved in, clanged at his shabby belt, and over one shoulder he toted battle-axe, fisherman's spear, and what looked to be a broken crossbow with no string, all bundled in a ragged leather thong that trailed in the breeze. He was black-bearded, with a mustache for the ages. Late in years for a human was he, but raw with wild, matted braids and a high forehead. His name was Vig, from a ship's helm family called Thorson. And Thor's son he was, too, with knuckles like iron spikes and a stride as long as a Kettish camel. His companion was no less eye-catching. Where Vig was tall and fierce-eyed as a panther, this smaller fellow was grinning bright and short as a stump. Well-kept in steel-quilted gambeson and great belt was he. The armored shirt was green with a yellow chevron quilted on. The craft was excellent, and only a nick here and there showed wear. For armor he kept only one forearm brace, a glimmering steel plate curved to fit and double-belted. It was etched with a rose motif. This smaller man had his hands full. In one, a great haversack of foodstuff that swung from side to side, and in the other he carried a veritable arsenal of arrows and bows of every kind. The man was comically over-equipped. No less than 4 bows he had, and 100 arrows at least, all with different colored fletching and shafts from all over Alfheim. He was clean-shaven, with hair tucked in a tidy tail, and one golden earring to shine on his friendly face. His name was Drum. "Drum, is there any more pemmican in there, or have you eaten it all?" Vig stabbed, stepping over then slinging mud with him. "Yah, mind your muck, ape!" Drum laughed and revealed a crinkled strip of dried meat. This Vig snatched up with his free hand and chewed like a cigar. "We've done well this time, despite this god-awful hike, old friend." Vig's words were garbled up in a mouth of venison. "The emeralds alone will buy us a ship full of women, and women full of gar." They both chuckled, but they were tired and their sloppy strides showed it. 50 miles or more had they trudged from that hellish mine to reach New Haven. There were precious few towns this far north. "Udin's hand," Drum said. "This town better be nice and quiet. With a fluffy bed and enough guard to slake the likes of us, I am bush." He scanned the roof lines, looking ahead, looking for telltale chimney puffs of a cozy inn. But something didn't feel right here. The roof tiles slumped. The stacks were pointed with iron corners, and the weather vanes atop were archaic and weird in their design. But on they went, being eyed all the way by wall guards as they approached. "Oi, you lot!" The wall guard voice came at last. Only his helm was visible atop the timbered wall. The gates were open, but entry was by no means open to all. "What think you, walking into New Haven with a bleeding arsenal like that?" "We've enough gold for all, good man," Vig answered boldly, pausing and adjusting his belt. "Send your 2 best men, and we'll pay them a year's wage to show us the best inn you've got." Drum rolled his eyes. In seconds the guard and a newly appeared friend arrived, eager and shifty. A bit of rain began to mist them, gently at first, and then Vig opened his mouth like a hippo to taste it. "We've no use of porters," Drum explained, handing each man a stack of 100 coin. Gods, it felt good to be rid of those damned heavy coins. "But if you could make way to the finest inn, we'd be much obliged." The guard's eyes lit up, and yet they seemed to hesitate. "Oh, don't tell me that's not enough coin," Vig started, annoyed. "Well, it's just, today, in New Haven, I, spit it out, man," Vig barked, shifting his shoulder under one heavy rusted spalder. Today, New Haven is a bit, well, we can make our way through the crowds. This way, this way." The other guard heard this, shrugged, seemed hesitant but set to the task, walking off. And ahead they went, immediately meeting a throng. The road was packed with people. They came and went, but they were quiet for their number. It took no less than an hour to pick through them across the town square, apparently where the inn stood. Vig and Drum were both dead on their feet by the time they saw the burning post at center. And at this sight their tired hearts sank. "Vig, look," Drum poked. "They mean to burn some poor soul." "Hasn't the world moved on from that sickness? I've heard tell of this burg. Once a ship colony from the west shores of Ire. They wound up here, isolated, hard-nosed folk who still burn their own kin." Drum let out a tired, frightened sigh. We've picked quite the village for our reprieve, you old hound." Vig huffed at this, unamused, scanned the scene. At the far side of the square, a barred wagon was parked near the town jail. A cluster of guards, all with twisted goat-themed helm and hauberk, gathered there. Vig bumped someone with his axe haft, pardoned himself, and searched for a better way through the masses. The crowd thinned near the alleys, and so he nodded to Drum and they abandoned their unskilled escorts. Around the main block they went and found a portal to the high-stacked inn. And given a half an hour, they were in their balconied room, weapons piled, armor shed, and resting with a mug while dinner was being made in the tavern below. Perhaps they would find a moment's peace after all. "Snore and you'll get a dagger in the gut," Vig mumbled, dozing off, but still standing. He was watching the ruckus down in the square. "I have a feeling the day isn't done yet." He looked out from the balcony, situated above the crowd, and with all too good a view, the burning post at center. A pit tightened in Vig's stomach. He took another gulp of gar, and Drum was already asleep. Dark grew the clouds, and the rain came and went. And there stood Vig, watching, leaning, unable to rest with his uneasy dread. Some commotion was unfolding across the square, near the jail, but Vig couldn't take his eyes off that awful post, front and center. But that was just the beginning. The day, indeed, was far from over. Chapter 4. Drum had not slept in 3 days. Now that he finally had a bed, he went deep and quickly into dream. The deeper mind gave him little release, though. No golden feast halls or sunlit meadows. No clouds below flying feathers. This dream was simply a degraded echo of his current reality. Vig stood there, motionless, the crowd bustling below, but the sound was warped in the dream. Wrong. The clouds were sliding black ink, oversized crows pecked and fussed, and goat-headed men in steel skins shuffled about a rickety wagon with anxious clucking. Drum's dreaming eye was drawn to that wagon, drawn to its contents. Circular glyphs spun slowly on every surface, like a lotus vision gone wrong. Drum tried to shield his dreaming eyes, but the hallucinations and whirling patterns were even worse in darkness. And so he rose from the bed in slow motion, floated to the verge, and surveyed the scene like a ghost. He tried to scan the square, the charred post, but his dreaming mind returned again and again to that damned wagon. The goatmen prodded and pushed at the bars, but all of it faded. Drum could only see one thing: what was inside. It was obscured in some way, a shadow in smoke, motionless but changing, curled horns, red coal eyes unblinking, spider's legs or skin-stretched wings. What in hells was that? And then his dream became a true nightmare, for that thing noticed him. Across the public space, those tiny red eyes looked right through him, and a voice entered his mind in a way only a nightmare can. That hideous voice tainted Drum's bright soul with the ink of evil. "Set me free." Then there was a rushing of air, a distant thunder, and he was inches from it. The heat of it, the smell of brimstone and sulfur, his terror became complete, with a sort of cold numbness in his lungs. Drum sat up, awake, mumbling. Vig was still there on the stoop, looking out with his mug in hand. Drum had only slept a few moments, but the nightmare made it seem a life age. "You all right, me boy?" Vig asked. "Aye," Drum lied, shaken to the bone. "How fares our crowd scene?" "Something on the far side. A commotion around that wagon. Must be the guest of honor." He sniffed at that, waving Drum over to look. Drum hesitated, feeling cold fear along his back, but didn't show it, and rose. To the view he stepped and gulped a lump of dread in his throat when he saw it. The wagon. And into it was escorted, at spear tips, a little girl. "Gods above," Vig growled. "She's just a child." Drum was deaf to Vig's voice, eyes locked on the little girl as she sat in the barred wagon. He couldn't look away, and then her gaze met his, all the way across the scene, 100 yards away at least, and Drum heard it again, deep in his brain. "Set me free." "Drum, hey Drum, snap out of it, mate." Vig nudged his companion. "What's gotten into you, Stump? You're white as a ghost." Drum returned from his trance. Something's not right here." "Well, that's a bloody understatement," Vig returned, taking a gulp. The wagon began to move, pulled this time not by a mule but by the goat-helmed men, each pushing a yoke pole. Slowly through the mob the wagon plodded, the little girl inside motionless. The crowd began to change. From a hushed tension they turned angry. It began with yells, and then tossed vegetables and trash, then spitting and booing. The poor girl in the wagon was pelted with insults and filth from every side, but she remained perfectly still. And thus they crossed the square, brought her up, and ropes round in 2 tight rings. She was blonde as straw, lovely for her age, and now beginning to turn red from the squeezing ropes. Vig's gut was starting to twist. This could not stand. And then with a jarring shout, the moment was broken. A single figure in tall black hat and silver-decorated riding gloves strode up onto the platform beside the burning post. The crowd hushed. "People of New Haven," he began, with a sickening accent that reeked of false wealth and petty power. "Hear me! Stay your rage, though it be just." Quiet settled. Drum and Vig were stone still, feeling something inevitable on its way. "We gather to do what must be done," the tall-hatted magistrate went on, extending a hand to nearby Goathelm, who offered up a lit torch held in black iron sconce. "The gods have chosen to make us stronger with this plague of evil. Look how the deceiver uses even innocent youth as his foot soldiers. We will not waver. We will burn the evil to ash." He turned to the girl. Incredibly, she was still refusing to scream, refusing to cry or show any fear. She was stout as a tiger, and it made the crowd hate her even more. The girl glared, and then the overseer completed his preamble, looking right at her. "We cast you out, demon! We refuse your lies, witch! We defy your invasion of these lands! Now face eternity and be gone!" With this, he thrust the torch into the kindling below and stepped from the platform. The crowd roared. In seconds, the flames were climbing to the post, and the girl's flimsy prison frock would be ignited at any moment. Drum's anxiety reached an unbearable level. "We have to set her free," he heard his voice say, almost involuntarily. "Are you mad?" Vig replied, unable to look away. The flames climbed. Drum shook his wits loose, still believed his words. "She's just a girl." "Are you cracked, Drum? There must be 300 people down there." Vig motioned to the crowd, and as he waved his mug, the goat helms caught him in their view. It was nothing, a passing glance, but it made Vig uneasy. "We can't just stand by and watch an innocent girl be burned alive." "We've no idea who in hell she even is, old stump. What's gotten into you?" Without a word, Drum simply looked at his old companion, and his eyes told the entire tale. This was not within their tolerance to let a child be burned alive, no matter the details, and Vig knew it. "Ah, bloody hell, Drum, you big-hearted boob." With that, the Northman gulped the rest of his mug, took a long stride into the flat, and began buckling on his fighting gear. Drum followed, slinging 4 quivers, a crossbow, and 2 longbows. A 4th bow he also held, 2 arrows in his left glove. "We'll need a diversion," Vig said, resigned, spear in hand and helm crooked. "My blasted gear is shut. No plan? This should be interesting." As they returned to the Overlook, brimming with equipment and no plan whatsoever, the screams finally began. The girl was being licked by flames now, just at her feet, with little hot spots appearing on her frail smock. The heat was far ahead of the flame, though, and she was bright red, drenched in sweat and smoldering. She was being roasted alive, and her trembling lips finally opened. The scream was terrible, otherworldly, like a tear in time itself. The crowd let a collective gasp, and the mirth and tumult of the gathering was silenced. In horror, the town watched her suffer. Horror, that is, save one man, the black-hatted overseer. A sick grin was spreading across his face. The brim of his hat hid his eyes, so only that stupid, sadistic, toothy grin could be seen. "Time's up," Drum announced. "Get her free, and we make for the south edge of town. I'll handle the rest." Vig shook his head. 2 clangs he gave, spear to breastplate, took a great inhale, and vaulted over the balcony rail. In a clattering chaos, he tumbled down into the crowd, using his spear as a swing pole. From this he tumbled, parting the crowd like tall grass. In 2 incredible strides, he was on his way to the burning post. Drum loosed 2 shafts in a blink, and then 2 more in chase a split second later. The first arrow gobbed a goat helm nearest the bonfire. The second pierced the overseer's shoulder. And then the second volley of 2 struck the burning platform just ahead of Vig, perilously close to the leading edge of the crowd. They gasped and stepped backward, clearing a path for the dashing spearman. Now, history has blurred exactly what happened next. There are several versions of the story. Some bards, especially the red-silked fools of Cath, tell the scene as if some wild set of ropes or trapeze swings adorned the square, and Vig was like a flying gymnast baffling his foes. Another story, the grim version told widely in the east of Alfheim, portrays Drum with flaming arrows, burning half the town to ash in a destructive hail of unerring shots. There's even a version told by the grain farmers of Guadan, where Vig and Drum simply walked to the fore, challenged the overseer to a duel, and ended it right there. The truth is a far simpler and messy thing. Vig left his doubts on the balcony. One of the many virtues of Northmen, once they engage on a goal, the world fades. There's no regret, no hesitation. He pierced the crowd like a rushing plow wedge. 'Tween lowered helm and spear haft, the folk of New Haven tumbled and spun from his armor, spraining wrists, tearing tunics, and bustling with disorder. In 10 incredible strides, the Northman, clanging and clunking with his worn-out battle gear, had reached the burning pole. There the remaining goat helms had bolstered and met him with stubby swords in a poorly trained formation. "Out of my way, devils!" Vig yelled, his eyes never straying from the girl, who let fly another grating scream. The guards only braced, but they had sloppy military order. They were flat-footed and spaced all wrong to meet a far superior foe like Vig Thorson. Damn it! Vig knew he would have to engage, and he had to make it fast. As Vig spun to dispatch these wretched guardsmen, wrestling a few foolish thugs from the crowds as well, Drum set his mind to their escape. From 2 arrows he snapped the points, making blunt missiles. The first he drew, beaded on the tethered donkey over at the jail, and loosed. The stubby arrow struck the unsuspecting animal square in the rump. It cackled with surprise, kicked 2 poor souls in the chest, and bucked off toward the open street south of the square. The crowd parted near the wild beast, and the south street was now clear. The second missile, Drum zeroed on the overseer's wide-brim hat. He made the shot with ease, and the hat went flying, revealing the dark-eyed man, who still winced from the arrow in his shoulder. This taunting shot drew the ranking man's attention, and he locked eyes with Drum. "This ends now, you cruel wretches," Drum announced, standing on the rail of his perch. He slung the longbow, then brought up the crossbow and leveled it at the leader. By then Vig had disarmed one man, speared another through the gut, and swept 2 from their feet. To the girl he had climbed right into the flames and slashed her bonds with 1 dagger swipe. Her skin had already blackened, cracking open in places. It might already be too late. Minding angry spectators and leaving his spear behind, he wrapped one arm around the poor girl, taking care with her charred hide. The overseer addressed Drum, and the crowd was paralyzed with shock. "Defilers! Outsiders!" he barked, holding his bleeding arm. "You know not what you do. This demon must burn. It is our way." "Call off your goats," Drum answered, unfazed, "or die where you stand, sadist." "Kill them!" the overseer yelped. Drum was a man of his word and pulled the trigger. The bolt flew true and plumbed in the overseer's left eye. A frightened squeak rose from the mob, and they scattered as the overseer slumped forward into the flames. The remaining goat helms lunged forward, 3 of them here and a dozen more approaching from the north side of town. Half the crowd scattered in an instant, taking shelter in shops and streets beyond. Vig took the momentum, jumping down with the girl scooped. He landed with effort, spun to one side, but there he took a terrible jab to the ribs with a short sword, mostly to protect the smoking girl. This enraged him. He kicked the sword aside and then turned the kick into a sort of wide-legged lunge. This surprised his attacker, and with his free hand, Vig grabbed the chin of the ugly helmet and pulled straight down. Awkward and overpowered, the guard went to a mess on the stone, knocked senseless. Drum let 2 more bolts fly. The other guards reeled from the shots, and Vig had his path. He dashed. The owners of the inn then came crashing into Drum's room, behind him, and he jumped from the balcony. On a pile of crates and bread baskets he came tumbling down, but rolled with it, made his feet, and broke into a run. He and Vig, girl in tow, were at the south edge of the square in an instant. With the overseer dead, the town's response was in chaos. This bought the heroes time, and they vanished southward, using alleys and speed of foot to be rid of New Haven in a few moments. The girl was barely alive, wheezing, bleeding, still giving off terrible smoke, the smoke of charred flesh. They had ended it, but the girl was fading fast. She had a few strands of blonde hair left, a hint of life in cloudy eyes between charred lids. As New Haven rolled away behind them, a manhunt no doubt being organized, both adventurers started to realize they had plucked her from the flames too late. They stopped near an old elm, most of it leaf bare, even in late summer. Vig lay her down carefully. Pieces of blackened skin fell away, and her breath came in short gasps and hisses. They tried to tend to her. Gods, what a terrible and painful end. Still, they gave her what comfort they could. And that is the moment our story truly began. For onto this pitiful scene strode none other than the Beast of Arleston, Chain, the Fist of Nordheim, champion of the crossroad fighting pits. Around the glen, his massive form arrived in 2 great strides. Vig and Drum started at first, thinking the guards upon them already, but then froze, weapons raised. If he, or it, wanted them dead, they would be crushed by now. By Drum's slow hand motion, both he and Vig lowered their arms, Vig sporting a stolen dirk, and Drum, crossbow down. The giant simply looked at them for one breath, then glanced to the girl. His massive inhale jolted, became uneven. His teeth showed, his face wrinkled with anguish and realization. Drum and Vig stepped aside as the mighty thing leaned down, took one knee, and stretched a titanic hand out to her charred little form. She was tiny next to his bulk, but that huge, knotted hand touched her cheek with the gentlest, kindest whisper of care. The black eyelids fluttered open, with effort, sticking, and her eyes met his. Both gazes welled with tears, and those tears fell into the grass. Held they there that stare, her tiny hand in his, for 3 long breaths. And then, with a light breeze up there on Elm Hill, she was gone. Life left her silently. Poor brave soul. Chain grunted with racking grief. He did not let a howling cry, or smash the elm with rage, though he could have. The memories scraped at him. her blonde hair in the breeze on Hilk Harbor Ferry, her laughter as she tumbled in the pig pens, her smile as they ate breakfast in Nordheim Hall. Rather than thundering with anger, he lifted her up, pushed the burnt hair from her forehead, and lay her straight in the grass. With one huge gouge, he pulled the sod away, and a great heap of soil with it. Drum then stepped forward, digging alongside the beast with a stick. And into this sad, poetic little grave, Chain lay her with such tender care that even Vig had to wipe his cheek. They replaced the soil, made tidy the grass patch, and stacked a humble cairn of river pebbles there. All with no words. Only the breeze spoke her eulogy. At last Chain looked to his side, then down to little Drum. Drum flinched. The beast was easily 6 feet taller or more than the stout little archer.
The witch hunters.
Aye, Drum answered, head hung in shame. We were too late. Back to the marker, Chain's eyes went. Awkward, hesitant, Vig was forced to break the moment. Shit, he spat. Drum, old boy, I think they've got our trail. Down the hillock, and beyond a farmer's row of low hedges and cobble walls, a troop of goat-helmed cavalry rode. They were 24 strong, lances and half-shields at the fore, and a score crossbowmen on foot jogging up behind. Chain could be seen for miles. We've got to go, now! Vig gathered his gear, and then gave a look to the giant who had joined them only moments before. I don't know who you are, or what you are, my huge friend, but I'm guessing you're no friend of New Haven. We've poked the hornet's nest. Drum, we've got to go. Drum hesitated. Standing next to the giant, he looked up at him, no idea what to say. The sound of steel and horses grew closer. Chain was motionless. He stared into that grave marker, unblinking, distant, trembling with fury but stone still. His massive shadow engulfed the little scene, and some dark force crackled on the air with invisible power, far, far beyond the mortal coil. Drum was the kind of fool who would reach out and touch a slayer such as this, and he did so, one gloved hand reaching the beast's arm. The massive thing recoiled and spun, ready to crush Drum like a bug. Drawn from his grief trance by the touch, but not evil, not wanton, his fists stayed at his sides. Whoever or whatever he was, Drum thought, he was good within. I'm sorry we couldn't save her, but it's death to stay here. They mean to skewer us. Drum motioned downhill, and Chain finally looked that way. The bolts would be flying in seconds. Vig was already in position to sprint round the elm and vanish. Chain took one great breath, recovering his valor, recovering his wits. He scanned the cavalry, then looked back down at Drum.
Let them come.